The sunlight in Mrs. Vance's drawing room was too bright, too clean. It felt like it was bleaching the memory of the ocean from my bones. I could almost taste the salt water, feel the rough burlap of the sack, the terrifying final weight of the stones pulling me down. And his voice, always his voice, laced with a hatred so pure it felt colder than the deepest ocean trench. "As long as you're willing to marry our son Adrian Vance," she said, her voice a smooth, practiced melody of persuasion, "this villa and $30 million will be yours. And I promise to donate $100 million to the Sunflower Orphanage." A hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat, sharp and bitter. I choked it down, my fingers curling into the soft fabric of my dress. Sunflower Orphanage. She'd done her homework. She knew which strings to pull. In my last life, that promise had been the final hook that snagged me. This time it was just a reminder of how calculated it all was. I am Alara. And I am a ghost with a heartbeat. I died on my wedding anniversary, murdered by the man whose life I'd spent a year protecting. I was born or reborn with a destiny woven from luck. To marry me is to shield your house from calamity. Misfortune twists into blessing when I'm near. Adrian Vance, the only son of this powerful dynasty, was rumored to be cursed, a death sentence on his 26th birthday. His mother, the impeccably dressed woman sitting across from me, had begged me to become his human talisman. I did. I stood by his side, a silent, unloved wife, and I channeled the strange current of fortune that flowed around me toward him. Disasters that should have felled him merely glanced off. His family's wealth and influence skyrocketed. And all I asked for in return was the safety of the orphanage that raised me. But he despised me. He saw me not as a savior but as a jailer. He believed his own survival was inevitable, and that my presence had stolen the love of his life. Lena. Her name was Lena. On our wedding day, his birthday, he was unharmed. But Lena, heartbroken and reckless, got behind the wheel of her car. She didn't just kill herself. She plowed into a family of 4 on their way home from a birthday dinner. 5 lives extinguished because of his pride and my compliance. He never told me about her. He never gave me a choice. He just married me, resented me, and then on the anniversary of the day I saved him, he looked at me with those cold, dead eyes. "Even without you," he'd sneered, the words carving fresh wounds into a soul already scarred, "I would have survived my 26th birthday. But you manipulated my mother. You forced your way into my life. You caused Lena's death. Do you know what it felt like to lose her that night? You ruined everything. And now you expect me to be grateful?" He'd called me his lucky charm with a voice dripping with venom. Then he and his bodyguard stuffed me into a sack. I can still feel the coarse weave of the fabric against my cheek, the terrifying, clumsy way they tied the rocks to my ankles. The splash was deafening. The cold, a shocking final embrace. I struggled until my lungs burned, until the darkness at the edges of my vision swallowed everything. "Aren't you supposed to be lucky?" His voice echoed in my mind as the water filled my lungs. "Let's see if your so-called luck can help you survive this." It couldn't. And now here I was back at the beginning. Mrs. Vance was watching me, her head tilted, waiting for my grateful acceptance. "Mrs. Vance," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, colder, flatter than the girl she'd known before. "My good fortune is just a name. I wouldn't dare ruin your son's future." The door to the drawing room flew open before she could respond. And there he was. Adrian Vance. My husband. My murderer. His face was a mask of impatient disgust, exactly as I remembered him from 1,000 breakfasts spent in hostile silence. "See, mother," he said, his gaze slicing over me like a shard of ice. "I told you. Alara is nothing but a scammer. She just admitted it herself. Get rid of her. Stop listening to her nonsense." He looked me up and down, and the sheer, undiluted contempt in his eyes was a physical blow. It was the same look he'd given me before tossing me into the ocean. "I've met her type before," he continued, speaking to his mother but staring through me. "Reincarnated, coy, naturally blessed. All lies used to fool desperate old women and greedy social climbers." But as I held his gaze, something shifted. This wasn't just the disdain of a rich man for a supposed gold digger. This was deeper, older. This was a hatred that had festered for years. This was personal. The realization washed over me, cold and certain. He remembers. He's back to. He has been reborn with all his hatred intact. In our past life, when his mother had begged me, she'd never mentioned Lena. She'd hidden the one thing that could have made me refuse. This time I had the full picture. This time I knew the monster that lurked behind the gilded offer. If you know what kind of person you are, Adrian spat, then get out already. Or don't blame me for being nasty. He turned to his mother, his voice shifting into a persuasive tone that made my skin crawl. Mother Lena and I have been together for 5 years. We're planning to get engaged next year. She went to the Starlight Temple and got a charm blessed by the master himself. She'll be by my side the whole time. Do you really think I won't survive my birthday? Relax. You're overthinking this. Mrs. Vance looked from her son's arrogant face to my stony one. Defeated, she sighed. Relax, Mrs. Vance, I echoed softly, the irony tasting like ash. You're overthinking this. Adrian practically marched me out. On the grand front steps, away from his mother's hearing, he stopped and turned on me, his handsome face twisted into a snarl. Ilara, he gritted out, his voice low and venomous. I won't give you another chance to come between me and Lena. Even without you, I'll make it through my 26th birthday just fine. I'll prove to everyone that you're nothing but a complete fraud. I just stared at him, this ghost from my nightmares, and said nothing. I walked down the driveway, my legs trembling but my resolve ironclad. I didn't call for a car. I just walked, putting as much distance between me and that house as I could. I stood at the end of their long manicured road, the wind whipping my hair, and I finally let myself breathe. I was free. I had walked away. But the memory of the water, of the sinking of his hatred, was a stain on my soul. Walking away wasn't enough. I needed to truly live. And I knew with a certainty that shocked me, exactly where I needed to go. The villa wasn't just more luxurious than the Vances. It felt different. It wasn't a showpiece. It was a sanctuary nestled into the hills with an air of quiet strength rather than arrogant display. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs as I stood before the heavy oak door. This was a gamble, a desperate hope based on a single fleeting moment of kindness from a past life. I knocked. The wait was an eternity compressed into a few seconds. Then the door opened and there he was. Kalin Thorne. He was seated in his wheelchair, a blanket across his lap, but his posture was straight, his shoulders broad. His eyes, a warm, deep brown, held an intelligence that was immediately calming. Looked, surprised. Of course he was surprised. In this timeline, the only time we'd ever interacted was briefly at a charity gala hosted at the orphanage last year. He'd donated a generous sum and I'd been one of the volunteers thanking the benefactors. We'd exchanged maybe 3 sentences. But I remembered him. Oh, I remembered him. On the day of my wedding to Adrian, a day filled with fake smiles and a hollow heart, a man had quietly approached me near the end of the reception. It was Kalin. He'd been watching me all evening, and his gaze hadn't been one of judgment or avarice, but of concern. Ilara, he'd said, his voice low and gentle, a stark contrast to the booming music and loud laughter around us. If you're truly that desperate for money, I can lend you some from my personal account. No strings attached. But marriage is a serious matter. You should think it through carefully. I'd been so deep in my own miserable bargain, so convinced I was doing the right thing for the orphanage, that I dismissed him with a tight smile. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, but I know what I'm doing. Later, when Adrian's resentment had curdled into something truly dark and he'd made me a prisoner in my own home, I heard whispers. Whispers that Kalin Thorne was asking questions, that he was trying to find a way to help me. But his company was struggling, his own life a mess since the accident that took his legs. Adrian, in his cruel, petty vengeance, had systematically destroyed what was left of Kalin's business. The last thing I ever heard about him came from Adrian's lips, sneering as he patted my cheek with the cold flat of a knife. Did you hear? I didn't expect that cripple Kalin Thorne to be so infatuated with a scammer like you. What a shame. He went off a cliff because of a brake failure. The memory sent a wave of pure, undiluted hatred through me, so strong it almost doubled me over there on his doorstep. It wasn't just for Adrian but for myself. For my blindness. That hatred solidified my resolve. In this life, my purpose was twofold: to see Adrian Vance fall and to make sure Kalin Thorne rose. He was still waiting, his head slightly tilted, a polite question on his face. Miss Ilara? Is everything all right? Does the orphanage need something? I took a deep, shuddering breath. There was no elegant way to do this. No script. Just raw, terrifying truth. Kalin, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Then I forced it louder, clearer. Will you marry me? The shock on his face was complete. His eyes widened, his lips parted. He looked behind me as if expecting a camera crew, a prank. Finding nothing but my deadly serious expression, he let out a soft, incredulous chuckle. It wasn't a cruel sound, it was helpless. Kind. Miss Chin, he said, trying to regain his composure. Elara. Does the orphanage need a donation that badly? I'll have my secretary cut a check immediately. Please come in, you look pale. He thought I was here for money. Of course he did. I was an orphan from a humble background, standing on the doorstep of one of the city's most eligible bachelors, even in a wheelchair, proposing marriage. I stepped inside, the warmth of the foyer enveloping me. It's not about the money, I said, rushing to explain, to sell myself in a way that made me feel sick but was the only language I thought this world understood. Mr. Thorne. I was born with natural good fortune. Whoever marries me will turn misfortune into blessings. Their household will thrive. I can help you. He was silent for a long moment, his warm gaze studying my face, searching for any hint of deception. I held my breath. Then he smiled, a faint, sad, self-deprecating twist of his lips that made my heart ache. Elara, he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like a precious thing. You're not a product. You're a person. You don't have to sell yourself. He gestured vaguely toward his legs, the blanket. And me? I'm a disabled man in a wheelchair. I don't think I'm the right match for whatever fortune you're promising. Tears pricked at my eyes. I knew about his accident. 3 years ago. He'd thrown himself in front of a runaway car to push a young autistic child out of the way. The injury had shattered his spine and turned a celebrated, vibrant golden boy into a man the world now looked at with pity. He saw himself as less. I saw him as more than any man I'd ever known. I took another step closer into his space. The air crackled between us. I threw caution to the wind. But what if I told you I really like you? The words hung in the air, bold and terrifyingly honest. This time it was Kalin who fell silent. He met my gaze and I saw it then, just a flicker beneath the layers of self-doubt and caution. A deep, hidden well of something that looked like longing. It stole my breath. On a pure impulse, I leaned forward, closed the small distance between us and gently, so gently, pressed my lips to the corner of his mouth. It was just a brush of skin, a fleeting touch, but it sent a jolt through my entire system. I pulled back, my face flaming. What about that? I whispered, my voice trembling. Will that help you believe me? For a heartbeat, nothing. Then a change came over him. The hesitancy vanished, replaced by a startling intensity. His hand came up, his fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of my neck, holding me gently but firmly. He didn't pull me back for another kiss. He just held me there, our faces inches apart, his eyes dark and searching. Elara Chin, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intoxicating rasp that vibrated through me. Since you've chosen me, then don't you dare regret it. And in that moment I knew I wouldn't. Not ever. That night in Kalin's spacious, quiet home, I didn't feel like a lucky charm or a bargaining chip. I felt like a woman. His touch was hesitant at first, guided by a reverence that made my heart ache. It was so different from the cold, transactional consummation of my first marriage. This was discovery. He traced the line of my jaw, the curve of my shoulder, as if memorizing me. Are you sure? He whispered into the darkness, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Desire, yes, but also a lingering disbelief, a fear that I would vanish at dawn. I have never been more sure of anything, I breathed back, and I meant it. This was my choice. My rebellion. My life. I kissed him, pouring all my gratitude, my hope, my fierce, protective need for him into it. He responded in kind, his initial caution melting away under a wave of passion that left us both breathless. His hands, strong and capable, roamed my body not with ownership but with wonder. When we finally joined together, it wasn't about sealing a deal or fulfilling a duty. It was about connection. It was about healing. A sob caught in my throat, not of pain but of overwhelming relief. This was what I had been cheated out of. This was what living felt like. Afterward he held me against his chest, my head tucked under his chin. His heartbeat was a steady, calming rhythm against my ear. Tell me, he murmured, his lips against my hair. Tell me why you're really here. I couldn't tell him the whole truth. The reincarnation, the sack, the ocean. It was too insane. But I could give him a version of it. I told him about the Vances offer. I told him Adrian's contempt, his belief that I was a fraud. I told him I was tired of being seen as a thing, a commodity to be bought for good fortune. I saw the way you looked at me at the gala, I said softly. It wasn't the way everyone else did. You saw me, and I heard you were a good man. It was the barest shadow of the truth, but it was enough for now. He was quiet for a long time, just holding me. He's a fool, Kalin finally said, his voice hard. And he's wrong. The next morning he was a man possessed. Gone was the hesitancy of the previous day. Over breakfast he looked at me, his eyes clear and determined. The wedding will be in 10 days. I almost dropped my orange juice. 10 days? Kalin, that's soon. It's necessary, he said, a shadow passing over his face. I don't trust the Vances. I don't trust him not to try something. I want this legal. I want you protected. He reached across the table, taking my hand. His grip was firm. Sure. Unless you've changed your mind? No, I said quickly, squeezing his hand back. No, I haven't. He then proceeded to almost completely empty his personal savings. $30 million and the deed to a beautiful modern beach house were transferred into my name. A dowry. My stomach twisted with guilt. I pushed the paperwork back across his desk. Kalin, no. I'm not with you for any of this. I told you. He stopped me by taking my face in his hands. His thumbs stroked my cheeks. I know, he said, his voice unbearably tender. But I care, Alara. You're my fiancé. You're worth everything I have. It's not a payment. It's a promise. A foundation for us. How could I argue with that? The money felt dirty, tainted by the memory of the Vances identical offer, but the intention behind it was galaxies apart. His was about building. Theirs was about buying. Come on, he said, a brilliant smile lighting up his face. Let's go pick out a wedding dress. The bridal shop was a world of white silk and soft light. For a few precious hours I let myself get lost in the fantasy. I was just a woman in love, trying on beautiful dresses, stealing kisses from her handsome fiancé. Kalin's eyes shone with genuine awe every time I stepped out of the changing room. Stunning, he'd say every time, and I'd believe him. The illusion shattered the moment the bell on the shop door chimed. Adrian Vance walked in, Lena shoe on his arm. She was clinging to him, laughing at something he'd said. They looked like the picture of entitled, beautiful youth. Then Adrian's eyes landed on us. Specifically on Kalin's hand resting on the small of my back. A sneer so familiar it made my blood run cold curled his lip. Well. A scammer and a cripple. What a perfect match. The words hung in the air, ugly and loud. Lena giggled, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. I felt Kalin's body go rigid beside me. I stepped forward before he could speak, a cold fury rising in me. Watch your mouth, Adrian. I didn't take your family's money and I didn't marry you. You have no right to insult me or my fiancé. Lena detached herself from Adrian and sauntered over. She looked me up and down with blatant contempt. So, you're the little scammer he was talking about. Alara Chin. When Adrian gave a slight, confirming nod, her gaze turned icy. In our circle, she said, her voice syrupy sweet and cutting as a razor, we usually just call your type gold diggers. Her eyes scanned the shop dismissively before landing on a rack of clearance dresses shoved into a corner. She snapped her fingers at a flustered sales clerk. Those. Bring them here. The clerk, eager to please the famous Lena Shu, hurried over with the rack. Lena gestured toward me. This is what someone like you deserves to wear. I saw red. But it was Kalin who spoke, his voice low and dangerously calm. He moved his wheelchair forward, placing himself squarely between me and them. Even seated, he commanded the room. His presence was immense. That's enough, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Mr. Vance, if you insist on insulting my fiancé, I won't hesitate to fight you with everything I've got. Adrian's face darkened. I could see the calculations going on behind his eyes. He knew better than anyone that Kalin Thorne, even from a wheelchair, was not a man to be trifled with lightly. In my past life, Adrian had only won because he'd attacked Kalin when he was at his most vulnerable. A fair fight. That was an unknown variable. Adrian forced a laugh, tapping Lena's arm lightly. All right, enough, he said, the picture of magnanimity. But his eyes promised retribution. He turned back to us, putting on a mask of fake civility. Logan, Kalin. We've known each other for some time. There's no need to make things too ugly. He paused, a malicious glint in his eye. Since we've both scheduled our weddings for 10 days from now, and I hear you've booked the Celestial Grand Hotel too, why don't we just hold them together? A double celebration. The audacity was breathtaking. He wanted to publicly humiliate us. To showcase Lena, the real estate heiress, in her glory next to me, the gold-digging orphan, and Kalin, the cripple. I felt Kalin tense, ready to refuse, to shield me from the certain embarrassment. But I squeezed his hand. I looked directly at Adrian, a cold smile touching my lips. Sure, I said, my voice calm and clear. After all, who ends up being the joke that day, we'll see. Adrian's smirk was triumphant. He thought I'd taken the bait. Then let's look forward to it. As we turned to leave, Adrian hung back for a second. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. He leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for me. Elarichan, I won't give you another chance to come between me and Lena. Even without you, I'll make it through my birthday. I'll prove you're a fraud. And when that day comes, when everyone's pointing fingers at you, let's see if your cripple still stands by your side. I wrenched my arm free and met his gaze without flinching. What a psycho, I muttered, loud enough for him to hear. I walked away, my heart hammering, but not with fear. With anticipation. The game was on. The ride home was quiet. Kalin was lost in thought, a deep frown etched on his handsome face. The confident man from the bridal shop had retreated, replaced by a simmering insecurity. No matter how I tried to tease him to lighten the mood, he only offered me a strained, half-hearted smile. Back at the villa, the silence grew heavier. Finally, as we sat in the living room, the setting sun painting the room in shades of orange and gold, he sighed, a heavy, weary sound. Elara, he began, his voice low. You agreed to have both weddings held together. People are bound to compare Adrian and me. He gestured helplessly at his legs. When they see me like this, won't you regret marrying me? My heart broke for him. This was the wound Adrian had aimed for, and he'd hit it perfectly. I crossed the room and knelt before his wheelchair, taking his hands in mine. Is that what's bothering you? I asked softly. I leaned in and playfully kissed him once, twice, again and again, until a faint smile finally touched his lips. What's that smell? I teased. Is that jealousy I detect? It's pretty strong. His ears turned a delightful shade of pink. You're just trying to flatter me, he muttered, but I could feel the rapid, hopeful beat of his pulse under my fingers. I grew serious, looking him straight in the eye. Kalin, listen to me. Adrian Vance doesn't even come close to you. Not in character, not in strength, not in heart. He's a hollow man. You are the real thing. The tension in his shoulders finally eased. He pulled me onto his lap, holding me close, burying his face in my hair. Okay, he whispered. Okay. From that moment on, we became a team, united against the coming storm. We poured our energy into planning our wedding. Kalin was insistent that it reflect me, my tastes. He wanted it to be a day I truly loved, not just a spectacle. It was so different from the Vance wedding, which had been a cold, lavish showpiece orchestrated entirely by Mrs. Vance. Meanwhile, Adrian and Lena were putting on their own show. They were constantly in the society pages, photographed at charity events, and conspicuously at the Starlight Temple. The narrative began to shift. Rumors spread that Adrian was blessed, that he had an emperor's destiny. The talk of his curse was now publicly dismissed as a lie, a story concocted by me, a gold-digging fraud, to trap him. Lena took every opportunity to mock me in her social circles. She painted me as desperate, pathetic, a woman so obsessed with wealth she'd latch onto a disabled man after failing to snag the prime target. I received a text from Adrian one night. Just wait, Elara. You tricked me so badly last time and got Lena killed. This time I'm not falling for it. I blocked his number without a second thought. The wedding day arrived cloaked in a surreal tension. Our ceremony was set for the evening, the same time as theirs. We arrived at the Celestial Grand Hotel, a magnificent building buzzing with excitement. I held onto Kalin's arm, my stomach a tight knot of nerves. And there they were. Adrian, preening in a razor-sharp suit, a ornate charm from Starlight Temple hanging proudly around his neck. Lena was on his arm, draped in an obscenely expensive gown, beaming like a shark. They held court at the entrance, greeting a stream of wealthy, important guests. Adrian spotted us. His eyes did a quick mocking scan of our group. "What? Isn't today your wedding too?" he called out, his voice dripping with false concern. "Where's Kalin? Didn't he come?" He'd clearly been hoping Kalin would be too ashamed to show up. "He got held up on the way," I said calmly, my voice not betraying the anxiety I felt. "Where was Kalin?" Adrian raised a brow, smirking. "Held up? Or maybe just didn't want to show up." Lena giggled, covering her mouth. The crowd of socialites around them tittered, their eyes raking over me with smug disdain. I felt their judgment like a physical wall isolating me. The whispers started just loud enough to carry. "Kalin really lost out, not only paralyzed but his fiancée is a known scammer. I heard she was thrown out of the Vance house." I kept my head high, ignoring them until I came face to face with Mrs. Vance. The woman who had begged me on her knees was gone, replaced by a haughty matriarch. She stood beside Lena, playing the doting mother-in-law. "A person should be grounded," she said loudly, her eyes cutting toward me. "Should work hard for what they have. Relying on shortcuts and tricks to gain undeserved wealth will never end well." The crowd's scornful gaze solidified on me. I simply smiled, a small cold thing. "Don't celebrate too early, Mrs. Vance. The day isn't over yet." Her expression darkened. "Are you cursing my son Ilara?" she hissed. Just then the grand doors of the ballroom swung open. And there he was. Kalin. But he wasn't in his wheelchair. He walked in step by steady, confident step, dressed in a suit that fit his powerful frame perfectly. The room fell into a stunned silence. He walked directly to my side, his expression calm but his eyes blazing. He took my hand. "As the husband," he said, his voice ringing clear in the hush, "I should be the one managing my wife, not the other way around." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Vance's jaw dropped. He's standing," someone whispered. The shock was palpable. But before anyone could process this seismic shift, a scream tore through the air. "Mr. Vance's amulet. It's on fire." All heads swiveled to Adrian. The protective charm around his neck, the one blessed by the master of Starlight Temple, was smoldering, then erupted into a small, intense flame. Panicked, Adrian ripped it off, frantically trying to pat out the fire, but it burned to ash in his palms. I glanced at the grand clock over the mantel. 7 p.m. There were still 4 hours left until midnight. How would he survive them? The answer came instantly. With a deafening crack, the massive crystal chandelier directly above Adrian's head broke free from its moorings and crashed down. The world dissolved into chaos. The crash of the chandelier was like a thunderclap, followed by the shattering of 1,000 crystals and the screams of terrified guests. Dust and the smell of ozone filled the air. Through the panic I saw it. The MC, in a split-second act of heroism or self-preservation, had shoved Adrian violently out of the way. Adrian landed on the floor with a grunt, his suit covered in dust and glittering shards, his face a mask of dazed disbelief. He stared at the wreckage that had nearly been his tomb, his former arrogance completely shattered. Kalin immediately pulled me into his arms, shielding me with his body. His heart was hammering against my cheek. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. I could only nod, my eyes fixed on Adrian. Kalin began issuing calm, clear orders to his security team to manage the scene, to help the injured, his voice a steady anchor in the rising tide of panic. But Adrian's misfortunes were just beginning. As people rushed to help him up, the heavy velvet curtains near where he stood suddenly ignited. There was no candle, no spark nearby. They just burst into flame. And the fire didn't spread normally. It raced along the fabric with unnatural, terrifying speed, a line of fire shooting straight for Adrian. Adrian. My son." Mrs. Vance's scream was shrill, piercing the din. People scrambled, throwing glasses of water, a waiter dumping an entire ice bucket over him. Adrian was drenched, coughing and sputtering, stumbling to his feet. He was soaked, humiliated and shaking. He surveyed the wreckage, the shattered chandelier, the smoldering curtains, the terrified faces, and then his gaze, wild and frantic, locked onto me. "It was you," he growled, his voice trembling with rage and fear. "It had to be you." He pointed a shaking finger at me. The master said I had an emperor's destiny. There's no way anything could go wrong unless you did something. Elarichan, you can't stand seeing me do well, so you set this all up to ruin me. He was unraveling right in front of everyone. Rattled by the consecutive brushes with death, he completely lost control. He lunged toward me, his face twisted into a grotesque mask of fury. Kalin immediately stepped in front of me, his posture defensive, ready to fight. But Adrian didn't even get that far. As he stepped forward, his designer shoe slipped on a spilled wine bottle. His feet flew out from under him and he fell forward hard and heavy. And right where he was falling, a large, viciously sharp shard of glass from the chandelier stood upright on the floor, aimed directly at his throat. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was a perfect, deadly trajectory. Mrs. Vance screamed again and launched herself forward, not to catch him, but to kick the glass shard away with a desperate, clumsy swing of her foot. The glass skittered across the marble floor just as Adrian's body slammed down onto the spot where it had been. He'd escaped again by a hair's breadth. At that point, even the proud, arrogant Vances couldn't deny it. This wasn't just bad luck. This was a systematic, murderous dismantling. Mrs. Vance dropped to her knees beside her gasping son, her face ashen. She whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. Was that fortune teller right after all? Is there really a deadly curse? Lena was a mess. Her expensive gown was torn and dirty, her makeup streaked with tears. She rushed to Adrian's side, sobbing uncontrollably. Adrian, are you okay? This can't be happening. The master said everything would be fine. Adrian, clutching his chest, his breath coming in ragged pants, seemed to latch onto that one word. The master, he rasped, his voice raw. Get the master from Starlight Temple. Now. The Vance family staff scrambled. The guests watched, horrified and mesmerized. It was only 7:30 p.m. Barely half an hour had passed since the charm burned, and Adrian had already cheated death 3 times. He finally sat still, cowed, all his arrogance gone, replaced by a primal, terrified stillness. The master arrived in a flurry of flowing golden robes. He rushed in, his face a picture of solemn urgency. The moment his eyes fell on Adrian, his expression changed to one of profound alarm. A murderous aura surrounds him, the master intoned, his voice grave and carrying through the silent room. Mr. Vance may not live through the night. Mrs. Vance's eyes rolled back in her head. She would have fainted if a nearby guest hadn't caught her. Lena broke into fresh, hysterical sobs. Master, Adrian begged, his voice desperate. Isn't there any way? Any way to break this? The master frowned deeply, his eyes scanning the room. Then his gaze fell on me. I saw surprise, then awe flash in his eyes. He quickly walked over, ignoring Kalin's protective stance. This young lady, he declared, pointing at me. She is the key. She is the reincarnation of the Koi spirit, born with extraordinary luck. If she becomes your wife, you will be shielded from harm. She is the only one who can break this curse. The stunned silence was absolute. Every eye in the room turned to me. The Vances looked at me as if I were a ghost, a savior, a hated enemy, and their only hope all at once. Their faces were twisted masks of awkward, desperate need. Kalin moved closer, his body a shield between me and them. He leaned down, his whisper for my ear only. Alara, don't be scared. I'll protect you. We can leave right now. I nodded, but a strange calm had settled over me. I looked at the Millers, the Vances, and a faint, cold smile touched my lips. Finally, they were beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. Mrs. Vance was the first to break. She scrambled toward me on her hands and knees, her elegant composure utterly shattered. She knelt at my feet, her voice a desperate plea. Alara, you heard him. Only you can save my son. I was wrong before. I shouldn't have doubted you. Please marry him. I'll give you 100 million. Another 100 million to the orphanage. I beg you. She was practically wailing. Marry him tonight. I'll add another 30 million if you put on a wedding dress and marry him right now. Kalin's face darkened with fury. Mrs. Vance, he ground out, his voice low and dangerous. I've respected you as an elder, but Alara is my wife. For you to try to take her from me in front of everyone, don't you think that's beneath your dignity? All eyes were on me. The socialites, the masters, the terrified Vances, my furious husband. I paused for a moment, letting the tension build, then I nodded slowly. All right. A wave of shock passed through the room. Kalin turned to me, stunned, raw pain flashing in his eyes. How could you? His look said. I gently squeezed his hand behind my back, a silent promise. Trust me. The Vances began to sob with relief. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Alara. I held up a hand, silencing them. But I have 2 conditions. Mrs. Vance latched onto the words. Name them. Anything. The stars in the sky. I pointed at Adrian, who was watching me with a mixture of hope and loathing. First, I said, my voice cold and clear. I want Adrian to kneel and kowtow to me. 3 times. And with each bow he has to say, Alara, I was wrong, ma'am. Adrian exploded. You vile woman. You're dreaming. He tried to charge at me again, but his luck held true to its new form. He slipped once more on the polished floor, landing flat on his face at my feet with a painful thud. This time his forehead slammed into the ground, splitting open and bleeding onto the marble. Mrs. Vance burst into tears. Adrian, I've raised you, given you everything. Just this once, can't you lower your head to save your life? I watched, dispassionate, as the war raged on his face. Pride versus survival. Finally, with a sound of pure agony, he dropped to his knees. The mighty Adrian Vance on the floor before me. He kowtowed 3 times, each one a jerky, violent motion. With each strike of his head on the floor, he shouted the words through gritted teeth, each syllable dripping with hatred. Ilarichin is my goddamn queen. From the side, Lena screamed, You malicious witch. You're destroying him. I felt nothing but a cold, deep satisfaction. I gave a slight shrug. What can I say? I never forced him to bow. Adrian climbed to his feet, his eyes burning with humiliation. What's your second condition? He snarled. I turned and pointed at Kalin. I want you to say 3 times, loud and clear for everyone to hear. Adrian Vance is no match for Kalin Thorne. This somehow was even worse for him. Kalin was the man he'd always been compared to, the man he'd secretly resented and, in his twisted way, tried to destroy. To publicly declare his inferiority was a poison worse than death. But the humiliating kowtows had broken him. The words were torn from him, each one a struggle. Adrian Vance is no match for Kalin Thorne. He shouted it 3 times, his face turning a mottled, purplish red. He finished, chest heaving, and thrust his hand out toward me. I've done everything you asked. Now hurry up and marry me. I gracefully sidestepped his grasp. I reached into my small purse, my fingers closing around 2 small booklets. I pulled them out, a bright, triumphant smile spreading across my face. Oops, I said, my tone light and mocking. I almost forgot. I'm afraid I can't help you anymore. I held up the 2 red marriage certificates for the entire room to see. Because Kalin and I already registered our marriage this morning. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Then Adrian's face contorted. The hope, the humiliation, the rage. It all coalesced into something monstrous. Ilarichin, you played me, he roared. And then his eyes rolled back in his head. He clutched his chest, a strangled gasp escaping his lips, and collapsed to the floor in a dead faint. The room erupted into chaos for the second time that night. The double wedding was over. The Vance wedding had ended with the groom being carried out on a stretcher, his fate unknown. Part 6. The Aftermath. The following days were a whirlwind. The scandal was the only thing anyone could talk about. It was too juicy, too bizarre, too public to be contained. While the newspapers used careful, vague language, extraordinarily unlucky, a series of unfortunate events, the online world had no such restraints. Adrian Vance became a meme. #CursedGroom trended for days. Clips from the society news of him and Lena smugly talking about his emperor's destiny were edited next to videos of the chaos. The burning charm, the falling chandelier, his humiliating kowtows. The comments were merciless. So much for that emperor's destiny. He nearly died on his own wedding day, which was his 26th birthday. Yeah, that's not a coincidence. That master called it. Dude's got a murderous aura for sure. Did you see him bowing to that woman? Savage. Kalin and I watched it unfold from the quiet sanctuary of our home. We'd never actually had our wedding ceremony, of course. The day had been thoroughly hijacked. So, Kalin said one evening, pulling me close on the sofa, Did we actually have a wedding or not? There was a hint of frustration in his voice, a sadness that our day had been stolen. I turned and kissed him, smoothing the frown from his forehead. We have this, I whispered, pulling out our marriage certificates from a drawer. I held them up, the red covers a symbol of our real legal victory. As long as I have you by my side, it doesn't matter if there was a big party or not. This is what's real. He pulled me into a tight embrace, his emotions clear. He was relieved I was safe, furious at the Vances, and disappointed about our spoiled day. But his next words showed where his true concern lay. Elara, he said, his voice turning serious. What that master said, about you being born with exceptional luck. If people believe that, you could be in danger. He wasn't talking about Adrian anymore. The wealthy, the powerful, they're a superstitious bunch. The higher they climb, the more they fear what they can't control. I need to find a way to keep you safe. A chill went through me. He was right. I'd been so focused on Adrian and my own survival that I hadn't considered the wider implications. My gift was a double-edged sword. Trying to lighten the mood, I teased him. You sure you're okay with bringing such a troublesome wife home? He shook his head with a soft grin, but his eyes were sincere. He pointed to his legs. I'm the one who gained the most here. My legs were paralyzed for 3 years. Within 10 days of you coming into my life, I started to feel something again. A little physical therapy and I'm almost fully recovered. He cupped my face. Elara, you're my lucky star. His honesty washed over me, a balm to my anxious soul. He saw me. Not a coy, not a charm, but a woman he loved, who had somehow brought light back into his life. Later he asked the question that had been hanging in the air. Elara, do you really think he'll die? Like the fortune teller said. I thought of the heavy black aura I'd seen clinging to Adrian in the ambulance, a shroud of impending death. He'll definitely die, I said with a certainty that came from my other life. But whether it'll be on his birthday is hard to say. Families like the Vances have resources. They can try to cheat fate. But even if they keep him alive tonight, he's not far from death. Without my protection, all of that. I gestured toward the tablet showing the news. That was just the beginning. I was sure his body had reached its breaking point. I'd seen him cough up blood before he fell. The master's words weren't wrong. Adrian might have been born under a lucky star, but his family's karma, their greed, their cruelty, had corrupted it, turning his blessing into a curse. And the master's talisman burning? That was a warning. Something powerful was at play. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, shattering our quiet conversation. One of the staff came in looking uneasy. Mr. Thorne, Miss Chin. Adrian Vance's fiancée, Lena Shu, is at the door. She's distraught. Kalin looked at me worried. You don't have to see her. I should, I said, a sense of inevitability settling over me. This wasn't over yet. Be careful, he reminded me, his hand lingering on mine. I walked to the door, steeling myself. As soon as I opened it, Lena collapsed. She didn't just kneel, she fell to the ground, kowtowing over and over on the stone step, her forehead scraping against it until it was smeared with blood. I was too stunned to speak. She looked up, her face ravaged by tears, her expensive clothes disheveled. It's all my fault, she sobbed, the words barely intelligible. If I hadn't been so stubborn, if I had just let him marry you, none of this would have happened. From her, between hysterical cries, I pieced it together. Adrian was still in the hospital, critical. Mrs. Vance had spent a fortune on specialists and, more tellingly, on famous masters from various temples to perform rituals. But it was all failing. The masters would vomit blood, their tools would shatter. They all said the same thing. Only a marriage to the Koi-born woman could break the curse. Elara, I beg you, Lena pleaded, grabbing the hem of my dress. Mrs. Vance is keeping him alive by sheer force of will. As soon as the Civil Affairs office opens tomorrow, please divorce Kalin and marry Adrian. I'm begging you. I've never begged anyone for anything. I looked down at her, this woman who had mocked me, who saw me as nothing. There was no satisfaction in seeing her like this, only a profound sadness for the twisted mess of it all. I shook my head gently. You seem to love him, I said. But that's not enough. I am the reincarnation of the Koi, but my fate only allows me to protect one person for life. I've already married Kalin. Even if you forced me to marry Adrian, it wouldn't change his destiny. My loyalty, my luck is bound to Kalin now. The change in her was instantaneous. The desperation vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated fury. Her face twisted into something ugly. "You selfish bitch," she shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "Do you have any idea how many women would die to marry Adrian? Even if he rejected you, it was because of your low status. That wasn't his fault. You knew the truth. Why didn't you cling to him? Force your way in. You're the one who ruined him." Her words were insane, a torrent of blame and entitlement. And then in a flash of madness she lunged. Her hands, claws extended, went straight for my throat. I stumbled back, but I was fed up. In both my lives I'd never had a shred of goodwill for this woman. In the previous life her self-pitying drunk driving had killed innocence. In this one she'd chosen to see me as the enemy. Thankfully Kalin's bodyguards were already moving. They pulled her off me before her fingers could make contact. She screamed and fought like a wild animal as they dragged her, kicking and cursing, away from the house and threw her out onto the street. I stood there, shaking, my hand on my throat. It was over. It had to be over. But the news the next day told a different story. Under Mrs. Vance's orders, the engagement between Adrian and Lena was formally dissolved. The society pages showed pictures of a stony-faced Mrs. Vance throwing Lena's dowry items, jewelry boxes, deeds, onto the pavement in front of their mansion. The headline read, "Vance matriarch blames former future daughter-in-law for son's curse." I couldn't help but sigh at the sheer vicious irony. The two women, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law in a past life, were now tearing each other apart. The house of Vance was crumbling from the inside out. And for a little while, surrounded by Kalin's love and the peaceful life we were building, I dared to believe it was finally, truly over. The peace was fragile, a beautiful soap bubble destined to pop. Kalin's business was flourishing in ways that stunned even him. Contracts he'd only dreamed of were landing on his desk. It was as if my presence had indeed unlocked a current of prosperity for him, and it filled me with a fierce joy. This was what my luck should have been used for all along. Building, not protecting a wretch from his own deserved fate. We were in the middle of planning a belated honeymoon, laughing over brochures for tropical beaches, when Kalin's phone rang. His expression shifted from relaxed to focused in an instant. A major overseas investor wanted to meet. Tomorrow. It was a deal that could catapult his company into a new stratosphere. "This is serious," he said, his eyes alight with a passion I loved to see. "I have to go. I'm sorry, my love. We'll reschedule the trip, I promise." "Don't be silly," I said, kissing him. "Go. Secure our future." I felt a swell of pride. Our future. I urged his driver to get him to the airport quickly, waving until the car disappeared from view. The house felt suddenly too big, too quiet without his energy filling it. I wandered back inside, a strange sense of unease settling over me. It was too quiet. The security guards who usually patrolled the grounds were nowhere to be seen. I was about to call out when a movement flickered in the corner of my eye. I turned and a searing pain exploded at the base of my skull. The world tilted, fractured into blinding light and then collapsed into nothingness. When I clawed my way back to consciousness, the smell hit me first. Antiseptic, bleach, and underneath it the sweet, cloying scent of decay. I was in a hospital room, but it was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of monitors. And then I saw him. If a horror film crew had been there, they could have cast Adrian Vance without any makeup. He was a walking corpse. His skin was mottled with blackened, rotting blotches. His face and arms were riddled with deep, angry knife wounds, self-inflicted in a madness I could only imagine. His head had been shaved for medical procedures, and I could see the veins on his scalp, pulsing grotesquely under the thin skin, threatening to burst. He was propped up in the bed, but he looked like he belonged in a morgue. His eyes, sunken deep into their sockets, were fixed on me. They held no surprise. Only a bitter, weary recognition. "Elarichin," he rasped, his voice the dry rattle of dead leaves. "You were reborn too." There was no point in lying. The truth hung between us, ugly and undeniable. "That's right," I said, my own voice hoarse. He let out a sound that was supposed to be a laugh but turned into a racking cough. "You must feel pretty damn smug. In our last life I buried you with my own hands. And now the wheel of karma's turned. I'm the one reduced to this living corpse." I met his gaze, all pretense gone. "Yes," I said, the word cold and hard. It feels incredibly satisfying. He wheezed again, a terrible sucking sound. So Lena was right. You really do hate me that much. He paused, his chest heaving with the effort to breathe. I don't have long. The doctor said. I'm riddled with tumors. Everywhere. Even with the strongest drugs. I've got maybe a week left. The irony wasn't lost on him. Isn't that hilarious? I always thought that dying before 26 was some scam cooked up by a fortune teller and my mother. But it was real. It was always real. The silence that followed was thick with the specter of his impending death. Then with a sudden shocking burst of strength he lunged forward from the bed. His hand, cold and claw-like, clamped around my neck. His bloodshot eyes bored into mine, filled with a final, desperate malice. Well then, he hissed, his breath foul against my face. If that's how it is, why don't you die with me? I struggled against his grip, panic surging. His strength was unnatural, fueled by pure hatred. Let me go, Adrian. I choked out. I didn't even marry you this time. Lena is the one who wants to die for you. Shouldn't you be asking her? He chuckled, a dark, guttural sound. But you're Kalin's wife. The name was a curse on his lips. Since we were kids, everyone in the family compared me to him. Always saying I'd never measure up. So I schemed. I made sure he lost the use of his legs. I thought that would finally bring him down. He gritted his teeth, his grip tightening. I saw spots dance before my eyes. But then you showed up. With your so-called blessed fate. You healed his legs. You turned his entire career around. You gave him everything. Spittle flew from his lips. But if I drag you down to the underworld with me, he'll be heartbroken. His business will crumble. That would be the best joke of my pathetic life. You're insane, I gasped, my vision starting to tunnel. Last life you saved me and Lena died, he rasped, his eyes losing focus, lost in his twisted narrative. This time you refused to save me. No matter what life we're in, Alarichan, you are my curse. His hand tightened its vice-like grip. I couldn't breathe. This was it. This was how I died. His hand paused for a second. His eyes seemed to clear, looking at me with a strange final curiosity. His voice dropped to a whisper. Just one question. Did you ever love me? I didn't have to think. With the last of my air I forced the word out. No. Never. Blackness was closing in. I'm not that pathetic. I'd never fall in love with a man who tortured me to death. A strange light, something like acceptance, flickered in his dying eyes. Good, he whispered. Then I can take you with me guilt-free. He clenched his hand with his final, terrible strength. Bang. The sound was deafening in the small room. Adrian's head jerked violently. A neat, precise hole appeared in his forehead. His grip on my neck went slack. The light in his eyes extinguished instantly, replaced by empty, fixed pupils. He slumped forward, then collapsed sideways onto the hospital bed, dead. Finally, truly dead. I fell to the floor, gasping, clutching my bruised throat, dragging precious air into my burning lungs. The door burst open. Police swarmed in, guns drawn. And behind them was Kalin. His face was pale, his eyes wild with fear. He rushed to me, falling to his knees and pulling me into his arms, holding me so tightly I thought my ribs would break. It's over, Elara, he whispered, his voice shaking against my hair. He was trembling. It's all over. You're safe. You're safe. He stared over my shoulder at Adrian's corpse, and in his eyes I didn't see triumph. I saw a fierce, protective relief. He had gotten here in time. He had saved me. With Adrian's death, the Vance empire crumbled with a speed that was shocking to watch. It was as if he had been the rotten foundation holding up a house of cards. Without him it all came down. The vultures descended. Business rivals, creditors, former allies, all wanted a piece of the carcass. The news was filled with the fallout. Mrs. Vance, in a desperate, greedy last act, started liquidating everything. Not just the company assets, but embezzling from shareholder funds and charity foundations, trying to gather enough to flee the country. And who turned her in? Lena. Of course. Under her real name, she provided the evidence that got Mrs. Vance arrested at the airport, caught red-handed with suitcases full of cash and jewels just before she could board a private jet. The courtroom scenes were a media circus. The two women who had been mother-in-law and daughter-in-law in another life screamed and cursed at each other, tearing each other apart. They exposed every petty scandal, every dirty secret, reducing themselves and the once great Vance name to nothing more than tabloid fodder. They were two feral animals in a cage of their own making, and they destroyed each other completely. I watched it all from a distance, from the warmth and safety of the home I was building with Kalin. There was no satisfaction, just a quiet, profound sense of closure. The storm had finally passed. One evening I was in the kitchen leisurely simmering a pot of soup. The rich, savory smell filled the air. Kalin came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. His hands drifted down, gently stroking the gentle swell of my belly. "For the 1800th time," he murmured, his voice filled with awe that never seemed to fade, "I really hope it's a girl. A little girl with your eyes." I playfully elbowed him, rolling my eyes. "You say that every day. She'll be spoiled rotten." But inside, my heart swelled with an overwhelming, almost painful happiness. This was my life now. This was my luck. Not a weapon, not a shield, but a quiet, steady current of joy. It was in the way Kalin looked at me, not as a lucky charm but as the woman he loved. It was in the life growing inside me, a symbol of a future I had chosen, fought for, and won. The past was a closed book, a ghost story that no longer had any power over me. I had faced my monster and I had survived. More than that, I had found my prince. And as I leaned back into Kalin's embrace, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart against my back, I knew that this was the only fortune that mattered. It was real, it was earned, and it was mine. The end.